Good afternoon, everyone. It's Sunday, the 15th of September. It's 11 in the morning, and it's time for the Diablocritics.
Indeed.
Hey, guys. Welcome
Hey.
back
Yeah.
after a couple of months.
Yeah. I've missed you all.
Indeed.
Yeah, me too. It's been quiet, and it's been
Mhm.
and it's been but it was I had a nice break in August from a couple of things. I don't know about you guys, but I did take we did take some family time, which was really good.
Nice.
So
Nice. I'm getting some time this coming tomorrow, actually. So
oh,
away.
excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I don't think Josh gets time. And that's the price
Everything
that
that
you
I
pay
do
when
is
you
family time. So
Yeah. There you go. There you go. So awesome. And Vishanti, thank you for joining us today. So just to give people a heads up, things look a little different today, and that is because our fellow colleagues, what's that guy's name? Dan McClellan. That's him.
that Yahoo. Mhm.
That guy and Matt Monger were unable to join us today, and David McDonald was also too busy to produce. So it's a skeleton crew today. Myself, Dr. Jennifer Bird, Dr. Joshua Bowen. You guys want to just say something about who you are and where to find you? Maybe start, Jen. I guess this is on your channel too, but for my viewers, that's beneficial.
Oh, that's nice. Are we just introducing ourselves, or are we doing a little plug of our
Yeah.
stuff? Because I can.
Oh, do plug your stuff too.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
cool.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if we're doing. Yeah. Hi. I am Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a New Testament biblical scholar. I do feminist work. I do materialist work. So I look at the way what we find in biblical texts still shows up in our lives, basically. I do have a YouTube channel, Jennifer Bird PhD. I also just finally started releasing, I'm very excited about this. I finally released the first lecture, I guess you could call it, course on Paul. I have one, a two-part thing going on, making sense of Paul. 4 things I wish everyone knew about Paul and his letters, and then the second part will be 4 more things I wish everyone knew about Paul and his letters. Very, very creative, but very excited that I'm finally getting this out into the world. A lot of content around intro ideas, intro content that you would get in a undergraduate or seminary class on the Bible, and trying to make it available outside of classrooms. So I'm excited about that. And yeah.
Awesome. I popped in to your to your first your first stream about what we don't know about Paul.
Yes,
Week,
that
right?
was. I was hoping to play part of the video, and it wasn't quite ready yet. So yeah, I was plugging it
Pretty great
this week. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Josh, how you doing?
I am.
And who
here.
the hell are you?
Yeah, right. It's all a journey. So I am Dr. Josh. I'm an Assyriologist with a minor in Hebrew Bible. So I do a lot of counter-apologetic stuff. I feel like today is going to be maybe right up my alley. Super fun.
Indeed.
I am currently working on a Leviticus commentary. I've just finished my next major pass through chapter 10. So into chapter 11. So it's coming along pretty well. I also started back up in force on the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, Volume 3. So working on scribes and scribal education in ancient Israel at the moment. So that's going to be a really fun chapter to write. But Kip and I are in the throes of returning fire to one inspiring philosophy and one David Falk. So those are coming out sort of as they do. So that should be fun. There are many of them, unfortunately.
There are many.
Come out.
Yes. So when you make so many mistakes, it requires lots and lots and lots of work.
You mean us,
right?
Because it was
yes, of course, because
grotesque incompetence.
incompetent.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. So, and I'm Kip Davis. I'm a specialist in Hebrew Bible scholar and a specialist in early Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and currently slowly working through a book that I've been writing for the last year on Israelite religions. I was very happy though to finally finish my chapter on archaeology, which was the hardest one to write, and am starting a chapter on the institution, the institutions, the royal institutions, which I think might be the funnest chapter to write. So yay, that's good. Dr. Dan McClellan is traveling today, and Matt didn't tell me. Dr. Matthew Monger didn't tell me why he's previously committed, but I'm very excited that he is coming back.
Me too. Me too.
Second Sunday in October. Thanks, Tomer. It's always great.
Nice to have a laugh like that early on. It's good.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So sorry. Yeah, there's the
Thank you
link.
for that.
Awesome.
I'll try to come back to that periodically. And also, Jordan McLean, by the way, big L for expiring sophistry to hook up with David Falk.
Yeah, well, we all make our choices, don't we? So yeah. So Matt's coming back next month when we all hopefully will be back for regular scheduled programming. But I think we should get this underway today, and just to give a rundown to everyone on how this works and what we're doing. So the Diablocritics is a public access show we do once a month to familiarize people with the nuances of biblical scholarship and to respond to bad apologetics. We feature it's yes, true.
Or
it's all good. It's a parallel, Jen. It's
that's true. It's not redundant. It's a
right?
yeah.
Yes. So so that's what we're doing. And we often usually, I mean, so far through this is episode 5, and in the previous 4 we've pulled recent video content from YouTube and done some responses to it. We like to reserve time at the end for audience questions. If you have any, please just throw those into the chat. Vishanti is going to be watching for those. As always, super chat for priority. That's the surest way to for us to see what's going on, and by doing so, you also help to support our work as well. So so that's what's happening today. We're going to be looking at a video that popped up on a channel. A friend of the show, Zach Miller from What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You, runs a great show, and he is currently working through a series right now, responding or not responding, but just interviewing the contributors to this book that came out recently. That's the wrong, sorry guys, that's the wrong page. Let me get this one back. Oh no, that's also wrong.
Ooh, that's a cool desktop image though. Wow.
That is right. Do you not get that with your so let's go to the.
I could probably change it to that. I haven't looked.
You probably could.
Yeah.
It's just, the first thing that shows up on professional YouTuber here. Sorry guys.
Yeah.
What if I just go to the shop? I bet it's the first thing. There it is. So this book, 4 views. Let's go back to it. It's can I get, here we go. Let's do that. All right. Perspectives on the historical Adam and Eve. 4 views. with contributions from Kenton L. Sparks, who's pretty great, and he writes in this book about a non-historical Adam and Eve. William Lane Craig, I'm sure everyone's familiar with him. He talks about something called a mytho-historical Adam and Eve. Andrew Loke has written a chapter about the genealogical Adam and Eve, and Marcus R. Ross is a young Earth creationist. And this is actually, I learned that this is so this is his organization here, Cornerstone Educational Supply. This I'll just read this from the about page. As a creationist and science educator, Dr. Mark Ross discovered a need for educational materials to help students understand our world from a biblical young earth perspective. He founded Cornerstone Educational Supply to bring his experience to your science program. With creation-based supplies, God's world becomes richer and more beautiful as you learn from what he has made. Here at Cornerstone, we design, select, and assemble quality science materials to fit your educational needs. So that's who has published the book. And Zach wanted to interview all 4 contributors. He interviewed Marcus Ross, and he also interviewed Andrew Loke, who we're going to look at today. He tells me that, and I'm not sure if he's around today. Make sure you say hello, Zach, if you're in the chat. And he tells me that Bill Craig didn't respond to his interview request, and neither did Kenton Sparks, which makes me sad because I kind of like Kenton Sparks. So that's the book.
We already have a super chat, Kip.
Oh, do we? How exciting!
Yeah.
Oh,
Apologia for 5 beaver bucks.
Yeah,
Dr. Loke is the only apologist to file legal action against me for kicking his ass. So
no way.
Yeah, we need this story.
I know. I'm like,
holy cow. All right, well, show's over, guys.
Not quite.
No, wow.
Your bow tie's getting a lot of love in the chat, Josh.
I know. Isn't that nice?
Plus 10 damage roll against bigots, so yeah. And Tomer says there's a new Anchor Bible commentary on Genesis 1 through 11, so
yes, there is.
Less than a week.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. My book budget can't handle Anchor Bible. Yeah. So, I'll just have to I'll just have to wait to get screenshots from Josh. That's
I mean, are they updating? You know, I have the Anchor Bible Dictionary set, which was like a graduation gift, you know, for my family or whatever. And you know,
the commentary or the dictionary?
What's that?
The commentary or the dictionary?
No, the 6-volume dictionary.
Yeah.
Set,
Oh yeah,
which,
right.
I mean, I love, but like you have
dated.
to. It's totally dated, but like it's just like everything else. Like, but there's some good nuggets in there, but it's hard to know how much is. And anyway,
very true.
I
expect there's got to be plans underway to update that resource, because that's like a staple.
I think that's part of what it is, and I do think that's part of what the Bible Odyssey with SBL is about, is trying to do like manageable update, right? Isn't that your take on what I'm referring to Bible Odyssey in case people who are following us are not familiar with it already? It's
an excellent resource at the SBL website. People should check it out. But I assumed that was geared more to like lay audiences than
it is. Yes.
Than like ABD.
Yes.
So anyways, it's Anchor Bible Dictionary, a new version. What was that? 1996, I think it was.
95 or 6.
So we're due.
But sorry for the tangent there, but
no, that's cool.
Good
so
stuff.
well, I mean, are you guys ready to take a look at this video?
I've braced myself. Right. I'm ready.
Awesome.
So a lot of people today think that the scientific evidence for evolution and evolutionary population genetics contradict the Bible, right? And so my view is a response to this objection against the Bible.
Okay.
And as we address this objection, I think there are two key issues that we need to consider. One is how to interpret the scientific data, and the second is how to interpret the Bible. So when we think about how to interpret the Bible, we need to consider the genre, the context, the meaning of the words in the original language, the grammar, and the background and concerns of the authors. Right. So in this case, we need to consider the ancient Jewish background, and we should be very careful not to interpret the Bible in accordance with our modern scientific knowledge. Right. They'll be reading science, our modern science, into a text, and I think that is a bad way to interpret the Bible. This is the era of concordism. Rather, I think we should interpret the Bible according to the above mentioned considerations, right? The 5 considerations.
All right. Hey, Vishanti, can you just bring back the points that he had on the last slide for us to kind of keep in view here? I think first of all, something I want to say at the outset here. Maybe this is important to point out when Loke talks about a proper how does he put it? He's got a proper interpretation of the science and the scriptures. Maybe it's important to point out that Dr. Loke is neither a scientist nor a biblical scholar.
Oh, is he MD? Is that what his doctor?
No, he's a theologian and a philosopher.
Okay.
So he got his PhD from I think
Regent?
from no, it's from the UK somewhere.
Okay.
But I mean, just something to keep in mind. How do we feel about his points here on how to properly interpret the text?
Go, Josh. I mean, yeah, your facial expression was
I mean, other than the word Jewish there, which I understand why he's using it, but
yes,
I like it.
Exactly. I was like, wait, are we not going to agree with this guy? Like,
no, it's good.
No, it looks good, right?
Yeah.
I have high hopes.
Awesome.
I'm not going to be let down, right?
Can we separate seminary PhDs from legitimate biblical scholars? No, actually, because there are lots of seminaries where you can get like a legitimate PhD that deals with legitimate critical biblical scholarship. King's College London, under the supervision of Alistair McGrath, famous, not a biblical scholar, Alistair McGrath.
Right, theologian.
I wonder how much it has to how much it's associated with Oxford. From Oxford.
Does everybody know why we're laughing at that?
Hopefully the longtime viewers are well versed in the lore.
Yes.
Are we developing lore? Diablocritics lore?
Apparently we are. We just had an inside joke.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So all good stuff, all stuff to keep in mind here too. Yeah, I like it.
Right. This is solid start. Yeah.
So he's saying all the right things. Let's watch the follow through.
The Bible according to the above mentioned considerations, right? The 5 considerations. We also need to distinguish between the following task, right? So the task of interpreting the Bible, I call this task A, and in distinction from task B, which is showing that the biblical account is true, or showing that any model is true, right? So that is distinct, right, from interpreting the Bible, and which is also distinct from task C, which is showing that there is no contradiction, no incompatibility between, say, evolution and the Bible. Okay, so we need to note the difference between saying that the Bible teaches evolution or Big Bang, in contrast with saying that the Bible does not contradict the evolution or Big Bang, for example, right? So these are 2 different statements. So when I present my model later on, I'm focusing on the second issue, right, in accordance with task C. And for task C, it is legitimate to suggest a possible model and say, for all we know, that might have been what happened, right? And this possible model may not be something that the human biblical authors are aware of, right? Because God didn't reveal to them everything, right? Obviously, God didn't tell them about quantum physics, cosmology, or whatever. So we shouldn't expect the biblical authors to tell us everything. So there's a lot of things that they don't know. And so I think, no, we suggest a possible model, that is okay, right? As long as the model doesn't contradict what they actually said in the text.
All right.
I'm starting to get
Now,
cranky.
are you?
Yeah, I get cranky when, like, people are doing ridiculous stuff. Like when their logic isn't logicking.
This makes me think right away about his note at the bottom of his first slide about concordance. And like I just that's the first thing I wondered when I saw this. I'm like, okay, aren't you just right at the outset doing the thing that you said you shouldn't do by I guess looking for this this compatibility between the ancient text and the science. And something else I also noticed in this, and this is a common apologetic trope, right? When it comes to the Bible, the goal seems to be among Christian apologists to say, well, the text doesn't it doesn't directly contradict this possibility. So long as it's not explicit, there's lots of things that we can import and read into the text. This is something that Josh and I have been dealing with a lot recently,
Is it?
in some of our stuff with inspiring philosophy.
I mean, it does certainly seem to be a case of beginning with one's conclusion and then backing into the data.
Yeah, right.
Now, I suspect that if pressed, Dr. Look would say, "No, I've worked through the data, and I've come to my conclusion, and now I'm trying to show how that process works." But this really does feel a lot like biblical archaeology over the 20th century.
Right.
So you're starting with this sort of assumption that the Albrightian school had, that the Hebrew Bible presents historically an historically reliable account of what happened in the ancient Near East. And now the apologetic discourse seems to be, on the whole, well, we don't really have enough data to say that it's true or it's not true. So if you look at the sherds from Heshbon, or if you look from the sherds from or the architecture from Jericho, there's fill. Much of this is in secondary deposits, and so we really can't construct a good representation of what was going on in the late Bronze Age. Therefore, the default should be the text is still reliable historically. And methodologically, I think that's problematic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, well, this is just what popped into my head. It wasn't the thing I'd prepared ahead of time to say, but I'm just mulling over how I'm in this the beginning of trying to wrestle with people to get them to consider that the book of Acts is not historically accurate, and it is deeply problematic and XYZ, right? And people, very, very well-meaning people, right, just aren't going to go there, or it's hard to filter that out. Like, it's hard to address that and the extent of it. And even some critical biblical scholars haven't done that, right? So, and that's newer. That's a much more recent, relatively speaking, of course, right? Obviously very important for the Christian community, of course. So anyway, I think there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but I also want to comment on the fact that I get why, I do, not that you two haven't said that, but I get the tendency, right, to want that to be the case. And I get that it's hard to consider the full implications of it not being the case.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think my concern in this, and then we should probably move on to the next clip. My concern in this always has to do with how much are we sacrificing from literary approaches to the text when centering our focus on the need for establishing some form of historicity, that, and in this case, one that complies with science, which is just completely irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant to the text, right?
It is.
And you know, in so doing, you're just, in my mind, you're committing, you know, the first the first cardinal error in reading the Bible, by just failing to grasp and understand what this is all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay, so let me say something more about task A first, about interpreting the text first, right? Before I talk about task C. So because we need to get the biblical data correct first, right? We need to interpret the data correctly first. For task A, now first of all, we need to consider the genre, and the different scholars have different views. My own view is that it's a complex interweaving of genres, right? There's poetry, hymn, and doctrine in narrative mode. But it's interesting to note that there are genealogies in Genesis 1 to 11. So this indicates an interest in chronology and a causal explanation. Right, there's a causal explanation of a sequence of events, how the present generation of people came from earlier generation. And so by putting Adam into the list, the authors of scriptures are treating him as a historical person, right, who caused the subsequent generations. And moreover, the New Testament authors, such as the Apostle Paul and Luke, they also regarded Adam as a historical person.
We lost Kip.
Still in with a doggo.
There we go.
You know, aside from, is it possible to put that list back up, Vishanti? I mean, I was nodding. You know, I nod with, oh, okay. It does. It is a complex interweaving of genres. Yeah, that's true. I agree. Right. Genealogies, an interest in chronology. Well, vaguely speaking, you know, but I kind of, right, seeing the writing here, he's going to put way too much weight on that, as if those are accurate, right? But sure, humans like to tell their stories, and they like to know where they came from and who they came from, and New Testament authors do talk about him as if that Adam was real, right? Again, but that doesn't mean that it was, and it's deeply problematic the way Paul does that in the Newer Testament. Anyway, I don't know, and I'm not familiar with like 2nd century BCE Jewish writings about Adam. You know, I don't know. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, there's an enormous interest that starts to pop up, right, in the Hellenistic period, probably leading into the Hasmonean period, in Adam and Eve. And you know, the presumption is that these are, you know, real people who actually lived, that, you know, this is a true story about the origins of our world. I just don't know how I just don't know how convincing it is that, well, you know, just the Bible seems to think that all the authors of the Bible seems to think that Adam was hysterical, therefore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is certainly just where my brain goes, but you know, I understand we're talking about the historicity of Adam, but from a scientific perspective, the elephant in the room is, you know, ancient Near Eastern cosmic geography, right? We're on a flat Earth with a big dome overhead,
right?
So, from a scientific perspective, you know, even if you won that battle, I think it still loses the war. And I don't think it's just as simple as what did the ancient writer think? Because that is a complex issue.
Right.
In that, when we think about history, we're thinking about it from through a very specific lens
Yes.
of modernity.
Right.
And when they thought about history,
Yep.
it was quite different.
Yeah.
And so the past, the way one structures the past, those words have, in this context, a lot of polyvalency. So I think it's more complicated, I think, than just they thought this happened. Because when you, and I won't belabor this, but when you think about incantations, for example, or any type of text that is working with a patient in the ancient Near East that's trying to put them, trying to work with some problem that they have, quite often what you will have is the incantation attempting to place the patient back in this mythological past, this pristine time. And it's efficacious to do that. And so if you were to ask that person, what do you think about the past? That's a very complicated question, I suspect, for them. And they're not thinking about it in the terms I think that we would. And I know that's probably not terribly specific here ultimately for the discussion, but I just think factoring those things in is incredibly important, because the way that they think about it is, as he's saying, I mean, I agree with him, right? As they thought about it is very, very important to this. So
right. I mean, what's the difference between Adam and Eve in the context of what their role is in the narrative and believing in Romulus and Remus, for instance? Like, what's the difference,
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. And I think, again, he's doing exactly what he said he wouldn't do.
Exactly. Right. That's
by
the
thing. in his instructions against concordism, right? In that, I think he's taking this perspective that, from my modern view of how history works, I'm just going to transplant that into antiquity and assume they all mean the same thing that I do. So
right.
yeah,
it really does seem to tip the hand, and he's certainly not alone in this.
No,
but it does seem to tip this hand that there are consequences for the text saying something, or the writers saying something that doesn't ultimately allow for our modern understanding of something scientific. So, I think that most Christians that I would engage with in this area, for example, that don't fall into this fundamentalist evangelical camp, would probably say, yeah, sure. They thought the earth was flat. There's a big dome overhead. That doesn't, it, therefore, no God, right? That doesn't follow.
Right.
So, but I do think for this interpretive framework, this sort of this type of inspiration and infallibility of the text, it does require that there not be this type of incongruency. The text can't say something that doesn't ultimately allow for modern scientific discoveries to be found. Allowed in that past. So you can't just have a dome overhead. There has to be something that makes that align in some way with what we understand the cosmic geography of the world to be. So I think to me that's the underlying issue here.
Yeah, agreed. So before we move on, I did want to point out my friend Lawrence over at Milwaukee Atheists threw this comment in about cosmic geography, and that is because he just released a 90-minute video, and it's pretty good, all about cosmic geography in the Hebrew Bible. So go check it out, everyone. And also, Vish put this up earlier.
Yeah. I wanted to share it at some point, and I was like, when do I do this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not chatting right now, so I'll go do this. Anyway, this is an editorial I wrote many years ago after Bill Nye and Ken Ham had a
yeah.
debate. And the next day I was like, this is just frustrating because the two groups, or these two people and these two communities, are just coming at the text differently. And the whole point, three reasons why evolution will never convince a creationist. And anyway, so it was my way of, I guess, venting about respecting where people are coming from. And you can't just talk to a creationist and convince them of things, right? There's a long process getting to being better educated about what this text is. Yes, back to those points, but taking them seriously actually makes a difference.
Well, next, Dr. Lowe's going to talk a little bit about the science, and then he's going to summarize and get to some of his ideas about ancient Near Eastern mythology that I really want to want to hit. But let's move on.
Yeah.
They also regarded Adam as a historical person. In the 4 Views book, I basically defend.
Can you pause it for a second?
John Collins,
Vish, I just want to point out to everyone, because this was news to me. This is not the good John Collins, or at least the John Collins that I read, not John.
Not the John J. Collins. Okay.
No, it's not John J. Collins, who wrote the enormous introduction to the Hebrew Bible, which some of us recommend and others do not. But
let you guess who doesn't in this group.
Yeah. So this is C. John Collins, who teaches at a Covenant Theological Seminary, and who was this was new to me too, but this will give you an idea of who this guy is. The chairman of the Old Testament for the English Standard Version translation of the Bible, which is really the suckiest of the translations that suck. So.
Yeah, it's a complementarian. Is that what I was trying to remember? Someone shared.
Yeah, it is. It's hard complementarian.
Okay.
Anyways, let's move on.
It's good to define the John.
He argues that Genesis 1:1 describes the initial bringing into existence of all things. Verse 2 gives the condition under which the first day began in verse 3. And he argues that the passage does not exclude a gap of duration between verse 1 and verse 2. And moreover, he argues that the 6 days are analogical. They refer to God's activity of shaping physical reality to provide a suitable place for humankind to live, to love, and to serve.
Are they, though? The days analogical? Are they actually?
They're closer than the one in chapter 2.
I suppose. Oh, this is pretty, and this is the thing I think that I just have such a difficult time wrapping my head around when it comes to interpretations of Genesis 1. There's, I mean, you're not going to get much of a harder, faster definition of a 24-hour day in Genesis 1. I mean, it's just laid out over and over there in the text, right? There was evening and there was morning, a day. Just
I'm gonna pop in because I read that a lot due to various trolls and people on the internet engaging in bad faith. And I know the Hebrew can be read a third day, but like word for word, it just says day 3, day 4, day 5. And
it labels
it
them.
frustrates me that some people's dogma makes them go the first day, and I'm like, baby, you don't know what a definite article is, and it's not in there, so nice try, but
yeah.
So sorry, are we talking about the difference between saying the very first and like these are days? I'm not sure what it is that trolls are like. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. I'm not sure what the thing is we're trying to challenge or push.
Young Earth creationists think that the creation week is a literal 6-day week.
Yes.
Like approximately 24-hour days, but there are old Earth creationists who are like, no, those weren't actually 24-hour days. They were long periods of time.
Right.
And
And you can
then
put
there's
gaps
another
between them
camp.
too, right?
And that's where the
Yeah,
gap.
and there's
Okay.
another camp that's like,
Okay.
well, they weren't periods of time where God did just one thing. It's just an analogy. It's like a metaphor
Right.
for
Could be
how God
billions of
created
years.
things over billions of years. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that for billions of years only plants lived without the sun or whatever. They'll kind of just hand wave it. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
there's a lot of shades there.
So
Kit,
we're
do you want to do
just
some super chats?
Yeah, sure. Throw them up there.
What were you gonna say, Dr. Bird?
no. I'm just trying to
Are you sure?
make sure I'm understanding what's going on here. Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Very much.
Okay. Real Pumpkin J for $4.99. The Nye-Ham debate caused my then creationist husband to realize that the arguments for creationism are bogus. That changed
Oh.
everything.
Nice.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah. Good for them.
Debate was
Very
cringe,
good,
but
yeah.
hey, good results. Yeah.
It was cringy. Yeah.
Kyle Pratt for $1.99 to quote Dr. Dan, when God began to create.
It's the.
I mean, I
the-
think this is an important. Go ahead, Kip.
I was just going to say, I can plug something else here. What your pastor didn't tell you, the channel where this interview took place, he's got some pretty great material all about how to understand that first verse in Genesis 1 and how to properly translate it. I encourage people
Monger
to check
also
it
had a
out.
clip up on Deep Drinks this week that went into that for like 3 to 5 minutes. So everybody kind of was in the same cooler, I guess, this week talking about it. So
Mm-hmm.
And I walked
I have a
through it.
translation of it after Josh's class, like the first round of class. And
Nice.
what I settled on was at the commencement of God creating the heavens and the earth. Because it's like you're not married to a certain specific time frame. It's just letting you know, like, hey, when God started doing this thing. But that's just me.
I mean, I talk about it in volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook in chapter 7, but part of the piece that gets often left out here, while the grammar is obviously incredibly important and foundational to understanding it, the ancient Near Eastern comparative data is really the thing that I think is perhaps most persuasive. So one of the ways that ancient Near Eastern, particularly Akkadian texts, engage with, and also more broadly, but the way that they sort of lay out these creation narratives is they do so with temporal clauses. So when this began to happen,
Absolutely,
right? So
yeah.
the Enuma Elish is sort of the quintessential example. So when on high is what Enuma Elish means.
Yeah.
So it's a temporal clause, and I give tons of examples of this in the book. So it's just sort of the way that you start off creation accounts, or accounts that in some way deal with the creative act by deities. So it's not in any way surprising. I mean, you see it in Genesis 2.
I was just about to say that. It's right there in Genesis 2 as well, right?
Go ahead. Good.
Yeah.
That's a good segue. Pick up on it.
Yeah.
No, seriously, roll with it.
No, I was all I was going to say was Genesis 2. But yeah, let's it's just the way that that ancient people wrote these kinds of texts. And Dr. Loke, if he is serious about paying close attention to genre in terms of reading this literature, then this is something that needs to be noted. But let's move on.
Now, a lot of people today think that evolution is contrary to what the Bible says about according to their kinds. But actually, when we read in the Hebrew, right, Richard Hess points out that the original Hebrew lamin, right, can be understood as saying that God created various kinds of cattle, creeping things, etc., without asserting or implying that each kind remain in their own kind, right? It doesn't imply fixed kinds, and therefore doesn't exclude the possibility that God could have allowed certain creatures of particular kind to evolve into another kind, so as to bring about various kinds of creatures which God has planned. Now, of course, I'm not saying that the Bible teaches that, right? But I'm saying that it doesn't exclude this, right, possibility. This phrase, according to their kinds, it doesn't exclude evolution.
So I think that important to point out, I think his primary goal in this is to confront young Earth creationism, right?
Okay.
And in so doing, constructing a theological model on it, which is fine. But as long as you're clear about the fact that that's what you're doing, I think my problem is that so often theological models get intentionally confused and obfuscated for, historical critical approaches to the text. But how do we feel about Richard Hess's comments about the expression lamine
Yeah.
in Hebrew, which just means um for the kind or according to the kind, that this is not there's no limitation here on it being just exclusively that thing. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, a mean. It gets, obviously we say kind because it's what, I guess that's what earlier translations took it as. And so then kind in a young Earth creationist camp becomes sort of a fixed thing. It's like this is a kind, this is the bird kind, or this is the cow kind, or whatever. I'm not up on it enough to know, sorry. But, when you read about it in other passages, kind seems to come, it's not, I don't think it's completely consistent in its usage, but I mean, it really does seem to come closer to like a species. And
seems to.
So this is like, if I were going to focus on something to show problems with the young Earth creationist approach, like I would focus in on that. It seems like in the beginning, according to their internal model, you'd have to have all of the species. So then you'd have to have all of the species coming onto the ark. Like that's problematic. So if I were gonna, focus on that, like that's where I would. But the reality here again is, we just keep going back to it, is the underlying assumption here that there's going to be this concordance. There's going to be this. Nothing that the biblical text is going to say is going to be contrary to what we know from modern science. It will always allow for it. And I think that's a point that's just taken on assumption here. It's taken on theological commitment. And I don't think it's one that would stand up to like historical critical scrutiny, to say the least.
Right. Thank you, Pragma Crystal. Just out of curiosity, I was trying to, like, when I see mean, I'm thinking mem noon, and I'm thinking of the preposition from or whatever. And
this is men yod noon.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay.
Mean.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. This word actually appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls in a text that I wrote my PhD dissertation on, to mean a particular kind of priest, like almost like an order or a grouping. It's very interesting. But anyways, it's it's
in that really common phrase throughout Genesis 1, Lemi Nehu.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I haven't translated that in a very long time. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next, I think he's going to talk about a couple more Hebrew verbs here.
And then the Hebrew words asa and yasa, which describes God's forming of embryos in the womb. Okay, as we know, the formation of embryos in the womb is a process that took time, right? It's not immediate, okay? And these same Hebrew words are also used to describe God's forming of the human species. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says yasa, right? Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground. The Hebrew word is yasa. And so the use of these words implies, or at least does not rule out, that God's forming of humankind was a process and not an instantaneous event.
Stop with it. Craziness. When you have not looked at what you're talking, like, compared to other examples, I mean, this doesn't. Sorry, I'm not very professional today. It makes me very sad when I hear someone making that kind of bizarre stretch, right? This creation of the human out of the clay in chapter 2 is a long process. What?
Embryos, Jen.
Right.
It's making
That's
embryos.
exactly what they were thinking of, by the way, were embryos. They knew.
No.
They just didn't know what to call it yet.
Jake Lounger, my advisor, one of my advisors and Megan's primary advisor back at Hopkins, he used to always press us in class to be able to distinguish between the data points and the mortar that connected the data points, which is the interpretation of how those data points fit together.
Yep.
And here is, I think, a showcase example.
Yeah.
And so Yatsah is often translated to form. So data point.
But this is I mean, the word itself, Yatsar, right? Like this is a fairly, it has its etymological genesis in this idea of potters making vessels out of clay, right? It's a completely appropriate word to use within the way that Genesis 2 is trying to tell this story.
Right. Yes.
Man.
And like John Walton, I think I don't want to say got in trouble, but kind of got mixed up a little bit in trying to fine tune the semantic range and application of these creative terms, particularly in Genesis 1.
Interesting.
So the use of bara was really what he wanted to focus on to create, and that has this very specific nuance. And Dennis Pardee, who is probably like a deity in the field when it comes to comparative Semitics, took him to task, to say the least, on this view. And this is where I think we've just got to be very careful when we look at the data points, because if Yatsar has a particular semantic range and you go to a psalm that says or a passage that talks about, like, here's how I formed you in the womb, right? Jeremiah's got one of these, right? And
Jeremiah 1:5 or 5:1, something like that.
And so that's a data point. We see Yatsar, if that's the word that's being used there. I don't know, I haven't looked. But if that's the word that's being used there, and we have before I formed you in the womb. So we're talking about this. The mortar, the interpretive connection that he is importing into the data points to bring them together, is that there's the assumption, to say it more basically here, that is being brought in, is that in the mind of the writer, he is utilizing Yatsar for this formative process to give that coloring, that nuance. And it's because that's the argument that's the nuance that has to be lifted out of that context and then brought over. It has to be extrapolated and brought over into the Genesis account to say, so what he's trying to get at here is this durative process. And that's where the argument has to be made. You can make that argument, that's absolutely fine. But what you'd want to do is collect your examples of Yatsar and make the argument clear that here, when Yatsar is used in this context, it demonstrably has this durative aspect rather than some aoristic aspect. And then it also applies here, and it shows up here, and you can see it over here. And so given that Yatsar has this durative aspect to it, then when we come back to Genesis 1, right, that would be an argument worth making.
Right.
But here, taking one verse, taking a modern understanding that we have of the formation of embryology, which now I'm completely out of my field.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not That's not a good way to approach this
Right.
type of lexicography.
Right. It is Yatsar and Jeremiah, by the way.
Yeah.
I just
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
No, that's good.
but why, yeah. Nope, you said it. You said it. Well said.
All right.
So just a clarification, I saw someone making a comment about oh no, Brahmanology. So this was a reference to John Walton trying to stretch and make a big deal out of bara. Is that what? So
I suspect so.
yeah. Just out of
Yeah.
curiosity, is that the same John Walton who was recently appointed the president at Princeton Theological Seminary? Different John Walton. I don't know.
I didn't hear about that. No.
Okay. Okay, just curious. He was a colleague, we went to seminary together. He's the first African American to be president.
No.
Just different guy.
Not that John Walton. No.
Okay.
No. Wow.
And the other
Congratulations,
thing
John
we need to
Walton.
note is that
Sorry.
the image of God, what does it mean? It refers to the election of Adam and his descendants by God for the function of royal representatives, that is, to represent God and to exercise a kind of dominion that could extend to the whole world over all other kinds of creatures, and a sense of responsibility towards the Creator God and other creatures for this kind of dominion. And also in the New Testament, when we read about the image of God, right, it refers to being conformable to Christ, the image to Christ. Acts chapter 17, verse 26, it says, "From one he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth." I interpret this to imply that before the 1st century AD, where this verse was stated in Acts, people of different nations were already descendants of one. Okay, so what this means is that from Adam, right, it has already spread to different nations. And so this provides reason for thinking that all people of different nations today are human beings, right, who are descendants of Adam and who bear the image of God. In my book, I provide a possible model.
I mean, do we need
in
to
accordance with task C to show?
Do we need to clarify that we can't all be descended from one couple? I mean, it's a thing that people feel the need to point out every now and then. So I don't know if we needed to state that here or not, right? Like this would be very inappropriate, and by the third generation, humans would be really messed up. No, like genetically and physiologically, not anything to do with sin and that craziness. No. Okay.
I assume so. I don't know the science on this like at all, right? Like I suspect that this is an attempt to make concepts like mitochondrial Adam and Eve align with the idea that that you could that everyone technically descends from the same people, but I don't think it quite works like that, and that's just based on my admittedly very, very limited understanding of biology. So I just have no idea.
I mean, that's often the first thing that people in conservative communities as kids, like figure out for themselves, right? It's like, wait, this won't work, like, you're right. Stick with that. Hang on to that, right?
Well, maybe you guys can help me. I honestly didn't follow the argument.
The last one?
This one here.
Yeah. Oh, this one.
It seemed like there was some description of what it meant to be in the image of God in Genesis.
Yeah.
And then he went forward to Acts 17.
Yeah. And he's also making dominion.
Yeah, from that point, I didn't see the connection there. Maybe you guys can help me.
From what I gathered, he was saying that Adam being made in the image of God distinguished him from other potentially human creations or human-like creations. And then he kind of goes into the New Testament for this. And he is just leaning into the whole, okay, maybe there were other people or other humans around. However, Adam's line was super special and potentially magic with the good genetics. And I took a peek at the next slide, and he's going to go into some stuff here. Some
I
descendants of Adam could have mated with non-human anatomical. Like, this is gonna get bad.
Yeah, and
It's gonna be
I
bad.
honestly think maybe we, just for the sake of time,
sure.
we skip over that stuff. And honestly, I
It's
have,
gonna piss me
you know,
off.
yeah, it probably
All
will.
right. So
Well, that
keep
helps
me right.
clarify to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
what he was saying. So thank you. That makes sense now. What he was saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've listened to
You
way
follow the
too
line,
many
but it doesn't make sense.
of these yet clowns to kind of pick up the nonsense
And
they're
I just
spewing. So
something that I continue to pick at is just how much I think people misunderstand what this concept even means, right? The image of God as it's presented in Genesis chapter 1. It's never defined. It's not it's just thrown out there. And I think he's probably right in pointing out that it has something to do with the stuff that follows it or precedes it about the dominion of humankind over the rest of creation. But I also think that people just gloss over
Mhm.
how this probably functioned conceptually for the people who originally read and wrote these texts. Like,
Yeah.
we look like the gods.
Because we made
Because,
them in our image.
yes, that's what it means.
Yeah.
Like, it just, yeah. So, no, go ahead, Jen.
Nope. Just
Okay, so
Yeah.
the stuff
ahead.
that I was quite interested in that
Yeah.
I really wanted to get to was his discussion about ancient Near Eastern mythology. And this was actually I was watching the stream live, so this was actually Zach was kind enough to sneak a question
Nice.
in there that I'd thrown into the chat. So he asked him, and it starts here with Zach's question and then Loke's answer. But Zach throws out this, a paraphrase version of the questions that I had regarding his ideas, Dr. Loke's ideas about ancient Near Eastern mythology.
I think there's some other arguments that you can make for this mythohistory review, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So, like, if you look at something like the Enuma Elish, has a lot of parallels with Genesis 1. Doesn't mean it's copied from it, but
Yep.
you get this idea that maybe like it's interacting with it, or the people of the same time period are thinking about the same types of things, therefore they're using same language. Or like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you've got this like you have this flood account in there. You also have someone like Gilgamesh and Enkidu, and there's this conversation about like eternal life, and it's got a lot of parallels with Genesis. Maybe not copying, but a lot of scholars argue it's having the same conversation, like what does it mean to be human, stuff like that. And then you have the myth of Oedipus, all these different texts. A lot of scholars are like said, hey, okay, maybe Genesis 5, that's historical in regards to like it's making historical claims about people that existed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the stories of Genesis 2 and 3 and like maybe the flood aren't literally like 21st century narrative in that regard. Like someone like John Walton would argue that yes, there's some historical points to this, but all of it isn't completely supposed to be like some 21st century historical account. So what do you think about that? That maybe like parts of these narratives aren't like literally historical. Like maybe there was a tree, but maybe it wasn't exactly like it's described, that kind of idea. What do you think about all that based off of like the similar, genre comparisons?
Okay, hold on, Vish. I think so. It's a paraphrase of the question I posed, and Zach's, I think trying to present and couch this maybe in terms that Dr. Loke can better deal with, I guess, from an evangelical perspective. But I hope everybody caught there that I was very interested in this relationship from his perspective between the many parallels, generic parallels, as well as I think literary and even some lexical parallels between these much older
Right.
ancient myths and what's going on in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Did
I
he
mean,
have any
think
sorry.
no, go.
Did he have any awareness of, other ancient I'm not sure what his response to that was, and maybe we're
Well,
gonna
we'll
see it in
find
a
out,
second, but
right?
okay. Sorry. I'm like, "Oh, what
No,
did he say?"
we
I know
do
this
we do need to get into it. What
I
he
know.
says. So
Sorry.
yeah, just yeah, I'm just setting that up. I don't know.
Okay. Yes. No, it's good to make sure everybody's tracking with what's going on.
First of all, there's this issue about the similarities, right? And
Yeah.
concerning the similarities, many critical scholars would argue or claim that the Bible actually plagiarized, copied from this other ancient Near Eastern texts, right?
Can we pause it?
They think that in
Yeah.
Elish and all those
Sorry, this one we may want to kind of do bit by bit.
We'll have
So-
to, I think with this one.
I'm not. I suspect that he's using that term somewhat colloquially, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands what it is that critical scholars are saying. Again, this is not. I'm not trying to throw any shade at Dr. Loke here. I think he's probably just using this like most people use that term.
Right.
But just so that it's not misunderstood, we don't argue that there's plagiarism.
Right.
So there is intertextuality in these ancient texts. And it's not just from, an Akkadian text being utilized in a later receptor Hebrew Bible text. You have Akkadian texts that utilize earlier Akkadian texts. And they do so primarily because that is how good writing was done and solid theological points were made utilizing mythological texts. You want to. There are examples, lots of examples that you could point to show a later text utilizing an earlier text or a source text, so that they can make a theological point. So it's not this. There's no intellectual property here that's being stolen. This is not some immoral thing. Again, I doubt that's what he meant by that. I think he probably just meant like they took it,
Right.
copied it or whatever. So, but I just want to make sure that everybody is clear about what we're saying.
Right, and that the intention is positive, right? It's not nefarious.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's funny that he used that language because I use it provocatively in my online course. I'm like, wait, so there's plagiarism in the Bible is like the thread, and just respond to that. And none of the students miss it. They're like, no, it's not plagiarism, right? It's working with ideas or familiarity, texts that are familiar and ideas that work for people. And of course they're going to draw on what came before them,
Yeah. And I actually wonder if we have a part of the issue here was actually exacerbated or magnified when Bart Ehrman published his popular book on scribes in the New Testament. What did he call that? Forged, I think, right? He does some good things in that book with regards to like the New Testament writers, but I think people then take some of those ideas and then they're pushing them back, right, on all sorts of other stuff, probably inappropriate. Like I've heard what's his name, Richard Carrier, talk about how the book of Daniel is a forgery because it claims to have been written by Daniel. And well, no, I mean it's not.
Yeah.
And most of it doesn't actually claim to have been written by Daniel, and you're just misunderstanding the ways in which ancient people appropriated older traditions and ideas, or even just used authorizing devices.
That's right.
In antiquity. But yeah,
That's right.
That's a bit of field. I'm sorry about that.
But it's related. It's all, misunderstanding what's going on here.
So no, the creation stories are not plagiarized. Scholars
Right.
don't teach that, but this question of intertextuality is incredibly important.
Yeah.
This other ancient Near Eastern texts, right? And they think that the Enuma Elish and all those texts were actually written earlier, and the Bible was written later, and copied from those. Now, I have never found all these skeptical, critical arguments convincing. I think that these are bad arguments. Why? Because even if the Enuma Elish is written earlier than the Bible, it doesn't mean that the contents of the Enuma Elish dated earlier than the contents that we find in the Bible. Why? Because the Bible
Okay,
could
hold
have
on.
recorded
Let's pause it
traditions.
there for a minute.
Facts.
Just
Jo-
because a story is set in a certain time doesn't mean it literally happened. And it doesn't mean it literally happened in that time. So his whole
that
thing
what
is
he
like,
meant
well,
by
yeah,
that?
the Enuma Elish is earlier, but I mean, it doesn't mean that those events happened earlier. Like, dude,
I'm
it's
not
not
sure.
real. These are
I don't
legends. These
know.
are
I
myths.
mean, I don't know if that's precisely what I meant, but he's clearly suggesting that um there's no good reason. I think I could summarize it by saying he's making the argument that ideas or arguments made for the greater antiquity of the Akkadian myths are bad arguments. Is what I heard him say,
I've
and that
dealt with
there's
too
I
many
just heard him.
creationists,
I heard him just
but we can listen
dismissing.
to him again.
Yeah, I thought he was just dismissing it as if it's not true that they're older.
there's
Maybe
that
I'm
too.
Typically,
I mean,
what I've heard, like from young Earth creationists specifically, not so much old Earth ones, but young Earthers will say, okay, after the flood, all the cultures dispersed across the planet and started like populating the place, and they just wrote their stuff down quicker. But you know, the Israelites and all the ancient Hebrews, they just took a way longer time to write things down. They were okay with oral tradition, so everyone's writings look older, but like they just came after our Bible story happened. It's very dishonest and cope, but
yeah, I think that's right. I don't know, Josh. Do you have? I mean, is there any good reason to think that maybe the Akkadian myths are older than the stories in Genesis?
Yeah, a couple. So again, I'm not clear on what he meant exactly. And so maybe before I answer, should we play it again and let him?
yeah,
Yeah, can you keep going a little bit?
rewound it.
Okay.
So let me try this again.
The Bible was written later, and copied from those.
Mm.
Now, I have never found all these skeptical, critical arguments convincing. I think that these are bad arguments. Why? Because even if the Enuma Elish is written earlier than the Bible, it doesn't mean that the contents of the Enuma Elish dated earlier than the contents that we find in the Bible. Why? Because the Bible could have recorded traditions that were dated even earlier, before they were written down in the Bible. I mean, these traditions could have been going around in oral form before they were written down. And we should also note that when we read the Bible, we find that the biblical account is actually simpler, right, compared to the account.
Remember what I said about oral traditions and how
Yeah.
I've listened to way too many of these clowns.
Yeah. I mean, it's a funny thing to say that the Hebrew people had oral traditions for a while before they wrote, but nobody else did.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, someone in the chat said it. My special pleading is better than your special pleading. That's all this comes down to. Yeah.
So, sorry, several things going through my head here. Okay. From a historical critical standpoint, and I think from just a general sound methodological standpoint, we have to deal with the data that we have.
Yes.
So again, it's fine if Dr. Loke is making the argument with an underlying premise that the Hebrew Bible is the divinely inspired word of God and therefore infallible.
Okay.
And in the way that he understands those terms. It's fine if he's making that argument. I think that maybe we have to be very upfront about that if we are making the argument based on that. So if the assumption is that God must have handed down these traditions and that the writers of the Hebrew Bible could not have been utilizing earlier mythological traditions and borrowed from them, because that would fly in the face of divine inspiration, the divine inspiration that I hold to, fine. But I mean, I think we have to state that clearly.
Right. And he didn't. Well, not in the clips that we're seeing, right?
Yeah, it feels like instead what we're doing is trying to make arguments playing in the arena of historical critical scholarship.
Right.
It's almost like trying to do an internal critique of historical critical scholarship, but bringing in unawares this presupposition that it could not have happened this way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And if we're playing inside of our arena, right, if we're playing inside of the historical critical methodology, you have to have data to make arguments. So the data that we have about the writings of the Hebrew Bible and the writings of ancient Israel is that they're relatively late. So, you know, we're talking about 9th, 8th centuries, right? That you start to get these writing traditions. It doesn't mean that there aren't inscriptions, whatever. I don't want to get into all of that. So when it comes to the mythologies of something like the Enuma Elish, this is a late 2nd millennium text. And we have material culture evidence of that. Right? We have the tablets. Right. We have the dated context, material culture context. And so, we can say with, reasonable certainty, as much as we could say with anything else, this is a late 2nd millennium text. We also know that the Enuma Elish is dependent upon and reworking the early 2nd millennium Anzu myth. And of course, the Anzu myth comes from the cultural milieu, and we have the Anzu myth in its early 2nd millennium context. So, we know that. We also know that Sumerian and Akkadian literary texts and what we would call mythologies go back into the 3rd millennium. So we have the tablets, we have them in dated, datable contexts.
Right.
So that data we have, the data that we have from the Hebrew Bible is quite late.
I mean, these are the Akkadian texts predate the earliest emergence that we see even of like a language, a Hebrew language for telling these stories, right? And I honestly think scholars are being incredibly generous very often in terms of their evaluation of how old these Hebrew Bible texts are, given that the manuscripts we have are like 2nd century BC, maybe 3rd, if you're lucky, right? We're already dating this stuff hundreds of years in some instances prior to the appearance of our earliest actual material culture for this stuff.
And I think, and I'll stop talking after this. Sorry.
That's why you're here.
That's right.
I think that one of the biggest hurdles that this argument would have to overcome, particularly this sort of oral tradition argument, is that you'd have to make the argument, given what we know about early Israelite formation, that you'd have to have Canaanite oral traditions going on for 6, 7 centuries, and they would be passed down through a non-Israelite cultural context.
Yes.
And brought into this newly formed Israelite, ethnicity this Israelite context, that's what you'd have to argue for. So in either case, I mean, I think ostensibly you'd have to be arguing for, unless you're trying to say, sorry, I'm just doing this off the top of my head here, so forgive me. Unless we're trying to say that this tradition was given to Moses in the 15th century, maybe, or even the 13th century at Sinai, and that he brought that in to the highlands amongst this group of former Canaanites, that were forming into Israel. And that tradition remained oral for what? 7 centuries?
700 years.
I mean, and wasn't written down as one of the earlier things to be written down. I suppose you could make that argument. But again, in either case, what we're doing is we're saying nobody would make that positive case unless there is a built-in premise that it can't utilize earlier mythological texts. And I think that's methodologically not what a historical critical scholar would do. So it's sort of an unfair internal critique.
I was going to mess with you a little bit about relying on what's historically possible for the origins of the Israelite people versus what's biblically told to us. But you were on a roll, and there you go again, trying to be all, fair about data, actual data, not asserted beliefs put into the texts to give them validity. Yeah.
All right. Luke's got some more to say here.
Yes. In English, which has a lot of fanciful details. The gods are fighting and fighting each other and giving birth.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Enuma Elish has fanciful details.
Because the Hebrew Bible doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't, yeah. The entire planet, even all the mountains were covered and all the animals were on a boat. Like, sweetie.
Yeah.
No.
We're just gonna form a human out of the dirt and do a little CPR. And bring it to life, because that's what happens in Genesis 2.
I wanted to nitpick that apparently Aaron Ross said that Adam was made from a golem spell. That's not how golems are made. But I see where he was trying to go with that. So I'll give him partial credit. And Apologia is Luke's got some more to say. Is
what is
really true?
A more fanciful story? Like, what does he mean by that?
Yeah.
Like, it's the Enuma Elish is certainly longer.
Oh, just impossibilities.
Let's let him cook. Let's let him cook.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I remember, believing things that are ridiculous just because I'd steeped in it so long, but I could look at others and say, well, that's ridiculous, and not see the ridiculousness applied to my own text as well.
I remember viscerally in one of my high school literature classes, we were discussing different world religions and context of, whatever we were reading at the time. And, my teacher's giving hey, this religion believes this, and then there's cultures of this and paganism, and just, kind of giving the information out like a good teacher does. And one of the students who was sitting kind of one row over, without a hint of irony, goes, well, why can't they just see that their religion is wrong?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yep. And there's just people who unironically just believe it. That's, she's blurted it out there. So, woo! Anyway, back to Dr. Cope.
Kenneth Kitchen, who is an eminent Old Testament scholar, has argued that the simpler account has a higher probability of being the more ancient one, actually, because you find that these details are being added in later and corrupting the text. So I think that there is good reason to think that what we find in the Bible actually dated earlier, right? It could have been shared around earlier in the oral tradition, and these traditions were also being spread around, right?
I mean, he's just asserting an idea, right? There's nothing. I mean, sure, we can see that in lots of cases, right? The earlier one is added on to, and look at the Gospels and the Newer Testament, whatever. But that doesn't. It frustrates me. when you can see it, like you were saying about the earlier issues, right, with Asa and Yatsar, like, just because that works very nicely for your premise, for your belief, so you're gonna bring that in here, even though anyway, the two of you probably have much more informed responses to that, but it just makes me cranky when people do these kinds of fanciful jumping around and asserting of things.
Well, I'm unclear as to, and Kip, I think that was your question. I'm unclear as to what specifically is more fanciful.
Oh,
Because the
Oh.
only thing that really came across to me was that the earlier texts are polytheistic. So you have more characters
Yeah,
that are
right?
engaging with one another. But
They-
So
I mean, Psalm 82 seems pretty fanciful to me in that context. So does Deuteronomy 32.
yeah.
So does
Yeah.
1 Kings 22 with
all
Micaiah
kinds of
ben
things.
Imlah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that
Well,
seems pretty fanciful. But I don't. I think I'm just unclear as to what he means by it.
But you also have to actually make an argument, right? Like, if you're going to posit that the Enuma, because that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing him say the Enuma Elish is expansive of this older story in Genesis 1. If you're going to make that argument, then you need to show it. Like, what is the Enuma Elish doing that they're expanding, right? And I think that's just, I mean, to me, knowing these texts pretty well, that's just a wild. It's a wild idea.
is it
Just because? No, go.
I'm sorry. I think I'm coming at this a different way, and is it possible that he's saying the fancifulness is not because Enuma Elish is drawing upon the Hebrew creation story in Genesis 1? Not that it's playing on it and making it, but that it's clearly showing development because it's more fanciful? A development within its own time frame.
He says corrupted a couple
Yeah.
times. So I
Well,
mean, I guess that can
I'm out
work
to
in
sea
both
here.
directions too, right? But
I mean,
even if it's,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was going to say,
I mean,
even
is he
if it's
comparing
development, I think you still have to model this relationship somehow.
Yeah, no, for sure on that. I thought he was just saying, look, their creation, this story about origins is more fanciful, therefore it is later than ours,
Yeah.
which isn't fanciful at all.
I agree. That's what he's saying. Totally.
Can I interpret
I just think it's
creationist nonsense for you? That's the only
Right.
reason I keep popping back in, because I've dealt with these guys for so long. I know exactly what they're doing. So in this worldview, there's an original version of history that happened,
Right.
like the way that God actually made it happen.
Genesis.
And the Hebrew Bible preserves that almost
That
perfectly,
original,
if not
yeah.
perfectly.
Right.
And then everyone else has a cultural memory of those things that happen.
Right.
But when they record it, either orally or in art, or they carve it in a tablet or whatever they do, it just gets changed along the way. And so
Yeah.
that's why they're similar, but not exactly the same. And again, it's special pleading and it's cope, but that's where he's going with this, which is unfortunate. But, you know, he's not an expert, and he has a dogma to hold to, so.
I don't know. Was it Walton that he cited that, or has cited? Oh no, it was Kenneth Kitchen.
Kenneth Kitchen, right? The eminent
Right.
Old Testament scholar, Kenneth Kitchen.
You know, if I could steel man the argument, I would say if you look at the story about the Nephilim in Enoch, then you can see that the Genesis account in Genesis 6:1-4. If we're arguing that that's the older tradition, which I suspect it probably is.
I think it probably is too, but I think it's important to point out that this is not it's not a settled thing, right? When George
This is true.
Nicholsberg wrote his commentary on First Enoch, he made some pretty good arguments for an older Enochic tradition of this. But anyways, go on, Josh.
But in that case, if we assume that, if just for the sake of argument, then we would look at this, shorter kernel, not terribly clear about the characters, if there is supposed to be any kind of assumption of that tradition, that gets picked up on in the Book of Enoch. And that story about the Nephilim and the mating of angels with human women explodes and develops into this full mythological text. And so if that is the case, then we would expect to see, as Dr. Bird pointed out, the earlier text, the earlier tradition, maintaining a more simplistic, closer to reality form, whereas the later text would have additions and corruptions being added to it. Of course, one would have to make that case. I haven't read what Kitchen says about this, and so I would have to take his understanding as it came, I suppose. But yeah, I guess that would be the steel man of the position, if that sounded fair.
Yeah. Well, and I just even just the issue with languages, like the different, I don't know, there are too many pieces that he is simply I think willfully ignoring, or not taking into account or something. And like one of the starred comments, well, it's fun, just like an apologist is typically going to do. We're going to pay attention to the Hebrew when it works for our argument, and we're not going to when it, or whatever. We're going to pay attention to the details at work. And it just...
We call that cherry picking.
It is called cherry picking, indeed. Yeah. And it just makes me very frustrated.
I just feel bad because they could have so much more fun studying and having like an enriching experience with the text if they weren't so freaking committed to like literal historicity and all that stuff. It's just so much cooler when you like broaden your horizons, but whatever.
I have found that to be the case as well. Yes, I agree with you. And I'm thinking about my mindset when I was in his world, like...
Me too.
I was protecting something,
I remember feeling like, oh man, is this it? I've gotten everything I can get out of it. And over the last few years, mostly due to like some of the people on this panel, I've grown to love the text and studying it. And it's just so much richer when you start reading it, comparing it to other cultures. Where are they same? Where are they different? What values do they encode in the story? What is the theological motivation there? What is it telling you about the culture? Like, those things are way cooler than just, did this happen, yes or no? That's boring to me. Oh, somebody was asking what my hat says. It's John Brown did nothing wrong. Ready for the next clip?
Yes.
Or the rest of this clip, I suppose.
Other people in the ancient Near East, and later when it was spread, and when it was spread to the Babylonians, the Sumerians, when these people write down their texts, it became corrupted, right, with all their fanciful details and myths and all this. And so, and that's why we find contents, right, in Enuma Elish and all this, right, has all these fanciful, all these ridiculous details. And so I think that those texts are actually corrupted, and we have to be careful not to use a corrupted text like the Enuma Elish, right, to interpret the Bible. Now, of course, I'm not saying that literature comparison is useless. In fact, I myself have also used some argument just now, right, when I say that we need to consider the genre, you need to do a comparative literature, right? So it is important to compare this literature to understand how the ways of expression, the genre, understand how the ancient readers would have read the text. However, we must be very careful not to therefore think that, just because the substance of the contents in one is clearly mythic and corrupted, therefore the Bible is also corrupted. And that doesn't hold, right? That is not, that conclusion doesn't follow. And so when we read the Bible itself, we have to consider not only the genre, but also the content, the substance, and how the reception history, right, how it is understood. And as I said just now, the New Testament authors evidently thought that a lot of important details are historical, including Adam and genealogies, for example. and therefore I think that we should regard those details as historical, including the details about the snake, for example, right? So Revelation, the author of the New Testament in the book of Revelation, right, when it talks about, it clearly understood the snake, a snake that actually is it represents the devil, right? Satan, the serpent.
I don't need to say this, but objection, Your Honor, univocality. You were all thinking it.
Yeah.
You're all thinking it.
I mean, I'm thinking of why you would conflate. I mean, I know it's been done, but it just is so frustrating the way people conflate the potential choice to use a snake or serpent in Genesis versus very much later, very different ideas, development of thought, all of that goes on to get to not just Satan and the devil conflated, right? But evil intention versus different roles. Anyway, just
I also wonder, because he talked about how he's doing the same thing, right? By taking careful consideration of matters of genre. And I'm like, are you?
Yeah, right. But are you?
Because,
Yeah.
like, how does these so people understand these texts don't come pre-labeled for us, and they weren't organized in, when we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was not a card catalog that had everything organized according to how people identified this literature. So when we talk about things like genre, scholars tend to be pretty confident in how a word like this functions for ancient texts. But this is a modern idea, right? Like, we're attempting to classify these literatures on the basis of things that they seem to have in common with one another, and but it's tough, right? I think when he talks about genre, he's not even really understanding what he's doing, because if you're going to say, yes, the book of, the stories in Genesis and the Akkadian myths, Enuma Elish, Epic of Gilgamesh, Dapan, the South Wind, Enkian and Herzog, there's a whole bunch. They're all part of this same genre. The reason we say things like that is because we're looking at the parallels that are obvious, right? And I feel like he's not providing a proper appreciation for what the parallels are and why scholars think about them the way that they do.
Yeah. And it just reminds me of all these students, these students who I have who will say, oh yeah, there's all kinds of genres in the Hebrew Bible. Well, they'll still call it Old Testament, even though I asked them not to, but yeah, all these different genres, but actually holding themselves to taking the implications seriously is just not something they're ready to do. And that's what I feel like, that's what it seems like is a part of what's happening here, right? I mean, kudos to him, right? He gets that there's poetry and epic and there's all these things and, doctrine in narrative form. Like, oh, well, good for you. Like that feels like a big step. But actually drawing that out and applying that information to how you then read and how you then look at any passage, but specifically a mythic passage about origins, like some basics here, right? Like, no, you're not actually taking seriously what you've just told us to take seriously. And
exactly.
If I could draw that analogy back to archaeology again, there's a big difference between going to a site and saying, I know that X battle was fought here at this date, and then digging into the tell and looking at the material culture and saying, well, does does this data allow for this to be true? Does that data allow for it to be true? Is it possible that we could have this, burn layer at this point and have this still be true? There's a difference between that and excavating the tell, looking at the material culture, and from the material culture saying, what is the best explanation to bring these data points together that we have?
Right.
Those are very different things. And unfortunately, both can feel very scholarly.
Yes.
Both can feel
True.
Right.
like good methodologies.
Yes.
Right.
Because on the former, the archaeology becomes like various accoutrements, right, to your argument. And look, this one works and this one works. And then you say, well, what about those other 4? Well, they don't discount.
Right.
They don't. It's still possible, but it doesn't mean that it's offering the best explanation for it.
Right.
And I think that's the methodological problem here. And I'll shut up after this because I'm the one that said we should probably move on. And here I am talking, but I don't have a problem with this theological commitment coloring his interpretation of the data points. I just wish that we would be very forthright about that. As Vishanti said, objection, univocality, that's a theological commitment that he's bringing to the table. I should be able to read something in Acts 17. I should be able to read something in the book of Revelation and have that inform what it says back in Genesis, because same author, folks. And that is a premise that you're bringing in to the discussion, but I just think we need to be very clear about that. That's all.
Agreed. So, what do we want to do here? I'm looking at the time. We should probably.
Yeah, we've only got like a couple minutes left of this, or we can go through some super chats. It's up to y'all.
I think I don't know. We've got what? We've got like 4, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 questions to hit. Do we want to maybe watch? Do we have time to maybe watch a little bit more and then do some super chats?
I think so. I think we've also addressed
the 12, right? It refers to the snake as the demon, the devil, right? So this provides reason for thinking that the snake in Genesis 3 is a snake which is able to talk because it was possessed by the demon. And of course, many skeptics will say that they will reject this. They think that they don't believe in demons, all this. But then it's a problem with their worldview, right? I think that their worldview is too narrow, too limited, given the evidence that we have for biblical revelation, and also given the evidence for demonic possession, which psychiatrists are talking about, right? So there are journal articles talking about evidence for demonic possession. I think that there is good evidence for things
psychiatrists start discussing demon possession.
But that's a Trump thing, isn't it? Everyone's talking about it. People are saying
they're all on the right, the far right. These are talking points. They just listen to them. They don't question it. They like the way it sounds, and you start repeating it. This is driving me nuts.
Demons exist, and I don't see why they couldn't make a snake talk, right? And John Collins also pointed out that the Bible isn't saying that all animals talk, right? If that is the case, then you would think that
demons can do anything, right?
But rather, it's only the snake that is mentioned as talking. Okay, and
the donkey
is the result. We have good
evidence. There's a talking donkey
in
the story too.
Authors of Revelation understood this as the result of Satan, demons, right? It was the representing demon. So given that this is the case, I don't think that we should take the detail of the snake as mythology. I think that we should affirm a literal snake that is being referred to in Genesis.
Woo!
So this is just one example of how.
Oh my God, we are going there, child.
Whether we should regard a detail as mythological or not mythological, we have to take into account all these different considerations, right?
I guess that's it, eh?
Like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, we're just going with a literal snake. We shouldn't look at that mythologically at all. Let's just go with a literal snake. Good call.
I mean, I don't get the sense that he actually understands myth. I think he's just Yeah.
Well,
so-
to him, myth is fake. That's
Right.
what that means. It's not like a storytelling genre or anything like that. It's-
But this seems so similar to arguments about the dating of the Book of Daniel.
Hmm.
Like we shouldn't be looking
Yes.
at, something like traditions attributed to Nabonidus in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We shouldn't be looking at
Mhm.
that because we know that it's written earlier, right? And we shouldn't be looking at the use of Av or Bain in the text because we know that it's possible that father and son, Av or Bain can mean grandfather and grandson. We know that that's possible. So we shouldn't be looking at those as counter evidence to this claim of historicity or as historical reliability that then informs the dating of the book. But instead, we should remember all these other factors that it's possible that this is the case based on other theological commitments that we have. And again,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that in a certain sense, if as long as we're upfront about it. That's all I'm asking is let's just get the cards on the table.
Yep, because then all of his claims that are mocking something that is coming at things differently, right? That he's not, it's not fair because he's speaking as if we're functioning, engaging this the same way, but we're not.
Oh,
And
Exactly.
his
okay.
dismissiveness is
Yeah. That's very
I mean, look,
frustrating.
they would want us if we came to the table saying we dismiss the supernatural outright.
mhm,
We
mhm.
dismiss it. So
Right.
anything that happens in the text, if it says supernatural, it can't be real history. They would want us to say that, I
Right.
think, up front.
Right.
And I think the same sort of thing is true here. Because it's not a level playing field. Like we're not playing with the same methodological tools otherwise.
Exactly.
Mhm. All
I
right,
mean,
we're
we
gonna do
did
some
just
super
say,
chats.
right? Talking snakes. Let's, demons can do whatever they want. I mean, there's so many pieces. You just,
They made a herd of pigs run off a mountain.
It's an
Duh.
it's an interesting idea given his data set for that claim. Like where do you discover all the things that demons can and can't do? I don't know.
Well, my pastor said.
right. Well, what's happened in our church?
I mean, he
service?
said that they can
Right.
mimic all these things, and you don't know about soul ties, and you need to go to a deliverance meeting and have people put oil on you and pray over you and speak in tongues and lay you out in the spirit and cover you with a sheet. Yeah.
Yeah, what a world. Boy.
Mm.
All right.
All right. Looks like we have a few to.
All right, let's
There are a few
let's start
questions?
tying a bow on all this. All right, so Aramgard for $5. Dr. Josh, I'm finally reading Ted Lewis's Origin and Character of God on your recommendation. 150 pages in and loving it. Just wish it was longer.
Oh,
You are the only human being, I suspect, that would say that you wish Ted Lewis's book on the origin and character of God is longer. It's just over 1,000 pages.
holy moly!
Only.
But
Hey, listen, when you like something, you want more of it.
it is
So,
pretty awesome.
Wow.
It's an awesome book.
Awesome,
Lori
awesome.
Allen,
Thanks,
$5.99
Lori.
or $4.99 had sent a super sticker, which doesn't preserve for whatever reason. Slings and Arrows for $5 beaver
Thank you,
bucks
Slings
also
and
sent a
Arrows.
super sticker.
Mhm.
Satan616, Hail Miro. Why do apologists cling to Genesis? Is it because they need original sin to make the salvation by Jesus' sacrifice work? Seems silly. It's part of
That's
it.
definitely part of it.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's all of it. It's an interesting question. It's a good question. I think
I mean,
because
if you
so much of apologetics just comes down to this, right?
Mhm.
What's going on in this book?
Making Genesis 2 and 3 work for Paul is a big piece of it, right? Which is what
Right,
he's asking. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
therefore, we're going to defend the whole thing, kind of a bit.
Logan Fisher, $4.99. What, in your scholarly opinion, is the most historically accurate text that might keep us here all afternoon?
Well, I mean, I think I assume, since this is the topic Logan's talking about, creation myths? I don't know. Or just the most historically accurate text
From the Bible, the
from the
Christian
Bible.
Bible in
Oh,
general?
maybe it's just from the Christian Bible.
I mean, I would say
Um,
Jonah.
I would not. But
Definitely the Gospel of John. Yeah, the most
yeah.
theological.
But there's
Genesis
various
Apocryphon.
ways. There's various ways to answer this question, right? Like
Mhm,
even and Jen, I think from a New Testament
right.
perspective,
I'm like,
you know, the epistles of Paul, the
First Thessalonians, maybe.
but
It's not
these,
really
like,
doing
these
much there.
fit within a historical context that scholars attempt to reconstruct, and you can gauge and gain useful historical information from them.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at you look at the actual histories in the Hebrew Bible, in the Deuteronomistic history, you know, First Samuel through to the end of Second Kings or First and Second Chronicles, you do encounter issues in terms of how to read those texts as accurate and what did he say? Uh, uh, most as historically accurate. You do encounter all sorts of issues, but then if you look at some of the prophets, right, you know, the 8th century prophets like Hosea and Amos, and maybe even some of the stuff in First Isaiah, or you know, my favorite, the 7th century prophet Jeremiah. um there's a time and a place in which these people are really writing, and groups of people to whom they're really communicating. And for something like the book of Jeremiah, which is you know, centered on this big problem of the Babylonian Empire bearing down on the city of Jerusalem. And I mean, yes, there certainly are historical issues in the book of Jeremiah too. But I think my point here is that there's a lot of historical data that scholars can glean
Right.
from various parts of these literature. They don't even have to be actual histories, right?
Yeah, I was even going to push back on thinking of First and Second Samuel and Kings and Chronicles as history at all. That's a Christian label to call them historical, or to call them histories,
Sure
and
is.
that's
Yeah.
problematic in and of itself. Yeah, right. I mean, I think that also applies then to the Newer Testament writings. And yeah, my thoughts go to the letters of Paul, but the genuine ones, but then the later ones also have an element that's telling us something that's happening and they're reacting to. And I think those writings are much closer to being historically accurate than anything we'd find in the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, you know. But again, where else do we get the idea of these trips except from of Paul's, you know, except from the book of, you know, like, so it's all very complicated.
I agree with Jeff. National ideologies.
I mean, why?
Very much on that team.
Yeah.
Okay. More super chats. Hang Fashi for $5. How do these people reconcile the whole Tiamat to whom creation through combat issue?
It's a good question.
Do they even
and I
know
think this
about it?
goes back to, you know, some of the points I was trying to make about constructing, you know, a model of how the Enuma Elish developed out of something like Genesis 1, right?
I mean, isn't the issue of creation through combat? I mean, this is just show. Oh, never mind. Sorry. I was trying to explain what it's actually doing instead of answering the question. Sorry. Reconciling with these things? No, because not looking at it, right? I mean, the fact that there's so much violence in the Hebrew Bible, and I would suggest still in the Newer Testament, at all that people are not challenging. Like, sure, people have issues with some of it, but they don't challenge all of it, and that is just that's the point. Is they're not trying to reconcile the violence.
It's okay because God said it.
Right. Right.
That's their reasoning, and that's gross. Don't do that. Maybe you should try like pushing back once in a while on stuff like that. Just a thought. Okay. Hey, Vishy again for 10. Off topic a bit, perhaps, but is there a connection between Adonai using his finger to write on the tablets and Jesus writing with his finger in the dirt during the adulterous woman story?
It's certainly a thing that I've heard people say. You know, I feel like we can make some. I mean, which way are you coming at the question, right? Are you coming at the question, is that why someone is saying that Jesus is doing that as a way to show that he is also God and divine or whatever? Or is it just a happy coincidence because styluses weren't very popular yet? And so that's
Where does
why didn't God write with a stylus on the clay? Like, tablets.
Where does that, is that a John story?
It's late, so it's added to, right? It floats around. It showed up in Luke in one exam, in one collection. So, but it has landed at the beginning of John chapter 8.
Right. Okay. Huh. Okay.
Mhm.
I kind of, I don't know. I kind of dig it. But I don't, just as a thought experiment or an idea. But I honestly, I have no idea. I think it's interesting.
Mhm. It's playful.
I mean, that's all the
Awesome.
super chats that we have.
The
So
Probably pretty good timing because my kids are
Probably.
starting
We gotta-
to require me to
Yeah.
head out.
Go
All right.
Go be dad.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up then, guys. You got Jen, you have anything going on you wanna?
I mean, I already plugged at the beginning, but yeah, I'm
sure.
excited to be doing finally releasing some courses or lectures, which can be found on my website. Yes, thank you, jennifergracebird.com, and in addition to the ones on marriage and the Bible, which are on there as well. Yeah, that's what I'm working on, and still plugging the book Marriage and the Bible. What do the texts say? So
Sweet.
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, just stay tuned to Rationality Rules and to Kip's channel for.
Oh yeah, that's first week of
multiplicity.
October, right? We've got we're gonna have, I think it's the first Friday in October. We're gonna have Dr. Maggie Bryson on to talk about the Ramesside period in the New Kingdom, Egypt, and how we understand some of that stuff with the Exodus story and the conquest. So, but I think and there'll be lots more to come. So, so there's that. I should probably say I'm going to be on. I know I had said this before that it was going to be on Friday, but it wasn't. It was me getting my dates wrong. This Tuesday, and I'm just doing the recording, but I'm going to be doing a talk with Intellectual Catholic, I think is the channel name, about these issues of the conquest and the Exodus and scholarly approaches to that, to the archaeology. And I guess I should probably I'll say this too. It looks like next week I will be flying down to Florida to record a podcast with Danny Jones. But not about what you think, guys. It's gonna be about the Dead Sea Scrolls and forgery, so it's gonna be super fun.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Are we good?
Good. Yeah.
Josh has to get out of here.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out, everyone.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think
the like button on your way out.
That too. Yes, we'll be back for another installment on the second Sunday of October. I don't know the date, but it's in October. Check your calendars. Until then, have a great day, everyone. Later.